Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, corruption, and deadly ambition. This is the story of the power and the pressure in college football. A tale of fame, greed, and the relentless drive for success. This case will leave you wondering, how far would someone go to protect their legacy? And what happens when the weight of ambition turns into tragedy? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of power and pressure in college football. Jax Carter and Liam Brooks were once the golden boys of Westlake University, two-star athletes destined for greatness, their names whispered in the same breath as NFL legends. But what seemed like a dream season quickly spiraled into a nightmare as pressure, addiction, and betrayal tore them apart. When the game they loved became a game of survival, neither could escape the dark secrets threatening to ruin everything. This is the shocking story of how two friends, bound by ambition, were dragged into a world where the stakes were higher than football, and the price of failure was far more than they could ever imagine. Jax and Jax Miller had always been destined for greatness. Born in Green Hollow, Texas, a town where Friday night football was as sacred as religion, Jax grew up with a football in his hand. From the moment he first set foot on the field, it was clear that he wasn't just any player, he was special. His arm was stronger than any quarterback his small town had ever seen, and his poise under pressure was unmatched. By his senior year in high school, he had already broken state records, captured the attention of major college scouts, and was the star of the local newspaper. His name was synonymous with success, and his future seemed paved with golden opportunities. The University of Westlake, one of the top Division I football programs in the country, wasted no time offering him a full scholarship. It was a dream come true for Jax. He was about to step into the big leagues. But little did he know, his journey would soon take a dark and unexpected turn. From the outside, Westlake University looked like the perfect place for a young star to shine. It had a rich football tradition, state-of-the-art facilities, and a coaching staff that had taken teams to national championships. Jax quickly became the center of attention. His face was plastered on billboards across the state, and sports analysts predicted he would be the #1 pick in the NFL draft by his junior year. The weight of his potential success was something he had always dreamed about, but now it felt more like a burden. Coach Robert Big Rob Fields was a man who commanded respect, both on and off the field. His reputation was built on a history of wins, and he had a no-nonsense approach to coaching. Under his leadership, Westlake had become one of the most dominant teams in college football. He saw in Jax not just a talented athlete, but a symbol of everything Westlake represented: power, prestige, and a relentless pursuit of victory. Big Rob had a singular focus: winning the national championship, and he would do whatever it took to achieve that goal. But for Jax, the pressure was mounting. His every move was scrutinized, his performances evaluated under a microscope. Every game was a chance to prove himself, and with every victory, the expectations grew. On the field, he was a machine, ruthless and precise. Off the field, he was overwhelmed by the constant demands placed on him. His personal life, his health, and his mental well-being all took a backseat to the pursuit of victory. Jax's father, Darren Miller, had been his coach for as long as he could remember. It was Darren who had pushed him to become the athlete he was, demanding excellence with each passing season. Darren had always been tough on him, expecting nothing less than perfection, but it was also clear that he had an unshakable belief that Jax was meant for greatness. That belief was now shared by everyone who watched him play, and it was suffocating. The weight of his father's expectations, along with the relentless pressure from Coach Fields, had begun to take its toll. Despite the overwhelming success on the field, rumors started circulating about Jax's private life. One of the first whispers involved a luxury car, one that Jax had been spotted driving, a vehicle far too expensive for a college student. Sources claimed it had been gifted to him by one of the university's high-profile boosters. The rumors quickly gained traction, and soon enough they became the talk of the campus. The NCAA had strict rules about impermissible benefits, and if the claims were true, it could mean serious consequences for Jax and the football program. Jax denied the accusations, but the damage had already been done. The media swarmed Westlake, demanding answers, but the university quickly put a lid on the scandal, brushing it off as jealousy from rival schools. For Jax, it was just another distraction in an already chaotic world. He had bigger concerns, mainly the looming pressure to perform in the upcoming season. Every time he stepped onto the field, he felt as though the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He was no longer playing for the love of the game, he was playing for something far more dangerous, the preservation of his future. It wasn't long before Jax's struggles began to affect his performance. While still undeniably talented, his game had lost its edge. He made uncharacteristic mistakes, threw interceptions at crucial moments, and seemed mentally distant during games. The cracks that had started to show in his personal life were now bleeding into his football career. Coach Fields noticed, but instead of offering support, he pushed Jax harder, demanding more. The pressure was relentless, and Jax found himself at a breaking point. The rumors of the luxury car were quickly overshadowed by the mounting pressure on Jax to succeed. Westlake's football season was on the line, and the championship seemed like the only thing that mattered. Jax had become a symbol, not just for his town, but for an entire program that depended on his success. His future, once bright and full of promise, now hung in the balance as the university, his coaches, and even his own family held him to impossible standards. As the season continued, the whispers grew louder. The pressure was pushing Jax to the brink. He began to question everything. Was it worth it? Was all this attention and expectation what he truly wanted? But there was no turning back now. Not when the eyes of the entire football world were upon him. He had become not just a player, but the embodiment of Westlake's hopes and dreams. What Jax didn't know was that the consequences of this pressure would soon unfold in ways he could never have imagined, and the whispers would only get louder, leading to a shocking revelation that would shake everything he thought he knew. By Jax's second year at Westlake, the pressures of stardom had begun to weigh heavily on him. As the starting quarterback, he was the face of the program, and every game, every practice, was a reflection of his ability to handle the spotlight. Off the field, the mounting expectations were becoming a burden. But what most people didn't know was that Jax wasn't alone in feeling the strain. Liam Carter, his former high school teammate and current roommate, was living in the shadows of Jax's success. Liam had once been a highly recruited linebacker, known for his ferocity on the field. His potential was undeniable, but injuries had taken their toll. In his freshman year, Liam had suffered a torn ACL that left him sidelined for the majority of the season. The injury not only affected his physical abilities, but also his standing on the team. While Jax's star continued to rise, Liam found himself relegated to the background, no longer a centerpiece of the Westlake defense. The pressure to recover, to be as good as he once was, weighed heavily on him. As the weeks passed, Liam began to distance himself from Jax. The once close bond they had shared during high school was slowly unraveling. In private, Liam struggled with the feeling that his glory days had passed. He spent more and more time at the gym, pushing himself beyond his limits, but his frustration grew as his role on the team remained unchanged. He watched as Jax, with his natural talent and unshakable confidence, effortlessly drew the spotlight. Meanwhile, Liam's future at Westlake was uncertain. It was during this time that Liam met someone who would change the course of his life. The man went by the name Mr. Gray, a shadowy figure who seemed to have connections everywhere: boosters, agents, and gamblers. At first, Liam didn't know what to make of him, but Mr. Gray's charm and quiet power were hard to ignore. Over time, Liam became more involved with him, drawn into a world of underground gambling and illegal betting. It started innocently enough: a few small bets on games, a few extra dollars to ease the pressure of his mounting debts. But as Liam's involvement grew deeper, so did the stakes. Mr. Gray offered Liam a way out, a chance to get his career back on track, but at a cost. The deal was simple: provide insider information about the team's strategies and games, and in return, Mr. Gray would use his connections to ensure Liam's future. It wasn't long before Liam found himself compromising his integrity. He would secretly pass along information about injuries, tactics, and game plans. It seemed harmless at first, a way to balance the scales of his own disappointments, but he soon realized how deep the rabbit hole went. Liam's secret life quickly became a dangerous web, with each lie and betrayal pulling him further in. But it wasn't just the money or the thrill of gambling that kept him involved, it was the promise of something more. Mr. Gray didn't just offer Liam financial stability, he offered him a second chance, a way to become relevant again in the world of football. With the pressure to perform already eating away at him, Liam found himself trapped in a world that seemed impossible to escape. As the season progressed, Westlake's dominance on the field continued, but so did the strain on the players. Jax, despite his outward success, was crumbling under the weight of expectations. His personal life began to unravel as the pressure to win grew more suffocating. The luxury car scandal had faded, but other whispers about his off-field behavior began to emerge. Some claimed that he was abusing painkillers to deal with the physical demands of the game. Others suggested that he was struggling with his mental health, but it was all speculation. Jax kept pushing forward, burying the truth under layers of determination. Liam watched this from the sidelines, his resentment growing. He had once been Jax's biggest supporter, but now he saw him as nothing more than a symbol of everything he had lost. It wasn't just about football anymore, it was about survival. Liam had been left behind, his career slipping away, while Jax soared to new heights. The bitterness festered inside him, and his once unshakable loyalty to his friend turned into something darker. Then, everything changed in the blink of an eye. During a routine practice, Jax took a hard hit from a defensive lineman. It wasn't an unusual injury, just another knock that players often dealt with. But this time, something didn't feel right. Jax staggered off the field, clutching his head. The trainers quickly moved in, and the team medical staff declared it a concussion. It was a setback, but it was manageable, at least that's what they said. However, the timing couldn't have been worse. Westlake had a crucial game coming up, one that could solidify their place in the national rankings. But something didn't add up. The injury seemed too convenient, almost as if it were too perfectly timed to throw Jax off his game. The whispers started again, only this time they were louder. A few players mentioned seeing Liam and Jax arguing a few days before the injury. Some speculated that Liam might have been involved in a more sinister way, but nothing was confirmed, and the incident was written off as a simple accident. Still, the doubt lingered. For Jax, it was just another obstacle in a season full of distractions. But for Liam, it was the beginning of the end. The pressure to protect his secret and salvage his own future was eating away at him. Every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into the dark world of corruption, where the line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred. What he didn't know was that his life and the fate of those around him was about to spiral out of control in a way no one could have anticipated. The whispers of betrayal were only the beginning. The truth was coming, and with it, a storm that no one was ready for. By the time Jax reached his junior year, Westlake's football program was on the verge of greatness. With a national championship within reach, the stakes couldn't have been higher. But for Jax, everything was beginning to feel like a weight too heavy to bear. The once confident quarterback, the man who had carried the hopes of his small town and a major university, was now struggling under the intense pressure. His personal life had become a shell of its former self, and despite his apparent success on the field, something was deeply wrong. Jax's performance had slipped. What had once been a flawless game had become a series of mistakes and missed opportunities. In the beginning, it had been small things, interceptions when he needed to be precise, overthrown passes that cost the team crucial yards. But soon, the issues began to compound. He couldn't focus. His physical condition was deteriorating under the constant strain of playing through pain, and the pressure to perform at the highest level was wearing him down mentally. What no one knew was that Jax had been hiding something from the world. After a particularly brutal game, he had been prescribed painkillers to cope with an ongoing shoulder injury that had plagued him for months. It had started as a temporary solution, a way to numb the pain and push through the season. But soon the pills became a crutch, something he needed just to get through each day. The once immense physical strength he had relied on was now compromised by the very thing that was supposed to keep him strong. The more he played, the more dependent he became on the medication. Meanwhile, Liam's situation was spiraling. His relationship with the gambling ring had become more complicated, and the debt he owed was mounting. The pressure to throw games, to feed inside information to Mr. Gray, had become overwhelming. But each deal made him feel further removed from the player he once was. Despite his involvement in the illegal operations, Liam had begun to feel a deep conflict between the loyalty he once felt to Jax and the hold that Mr. Gray had over him. Liam's participation in the scheme was no longer just about money, it was about survival. Every week, the demands of the gambling ring grew. Mr. Gray, who had once promised to help Liam's career, was now forcing him into increasingly dangerous situations. The bets were getting bigger, the stakes higher, and as Liam's debts spiraled out of control, he realized there was no way out. The ring had him trapped, and with it, his fate was sealed. In the midst of all this chaos, Jax and Liam's paths continued to cross, though neither truly understood the depth of the other's struggles. Jax's increasing dependence on painkillers began to interfere with his decision-making on the field, making him more vulnerable to mistakes. As his physical and mental health deteriorated, his relationship with Coach Fields also began to fray. Fields, who had once been a father figure, was now a source of immense pressure. His focus was solely on winning, and Jax was becoming more of a liability than an asset. The pressure to perform was suffocating, and there were no signs of it letting up. Then came the fateful moment that would change everything. During a critical game that would determine their playoff hopes, Jax took a hit that seemed like any other. The impact left him staggering, and for a moment, it looked as though he might have suffered another concussion. But this time, the effects were worse. He had difficulty getting back on his feet, and his vision blurred as he tried to shake off the hit. The trainers rushed to his side, but Jax insisted he was fine. He couldn't afford to sit out, his team needed him. The game wasn't just about winning, it was about keeping his image intact, about proving that he could still be the star everyone expected him to be. But it wasn't just the physical pain that was taking its toll. Jax's mind was unraveling. The painkillers, his reliance on them, were starting to affect his judgment, and during the game, he made several uncharacteristic mistakes. The throws were off, his timing was wrong, and for the first time in his career, his leadership was called into question. The stadium, once full of adoring fans, now buzzed with doubt. Coaches, teammates, and the crowd all began to wonder if Jax was truly the same player they had all looked up to. Back on the sidelines, Liam was watching closely. He had been keeping a secret of his own, a secret that was beginning to eat away at him. His involvement with the gambling ring had escalated to the point where he was now responsible for ensuring that Westlake lost the game. It was supposed to be a small mistake, a minor misstep, one that would keep the betting odds favorable. But as the game wore on, Liam's guilt grew. He wasn't sure if he was doing it for the money or for the promises that Mr. Gray had made, but he knew one thing: he could no longer stand by and let this happen. As the game came to its final minutes, Jax made a fateful decision, one that would have long-lasting consequences. With the game on the line and Westlake trailing, Jax called an audacious play, one that was risky and untested. It was a gamble, but so was his entire life. As he launched the ball down the field, the trajectory was all wrong. The pass flew high, too high for the receiver, and the ball landed in the hands of the opposing team. It was an interception, and the game was lost. The fallout was immediate. Jax's mistake was the headline of every sports article. Westlake's hopes for a national championship were dashed, and the media quickly turned on Jax. Coach Fields, who had once adored him, now had to answer for the loss. The university, which had invested millions in Jax's success, was scrambling to protect its reputation. But behind closed doors, the pressure was mounting in ways no one understood. For Jax, this loss wasn't just a setback, it was the beginning of something far more sinister. The cracks that had appeared in his game were now visible to everyone. His personal demons, his addiction, his deteriorating mental state, and the growing rift between him and his friends had come to a head. And in the shadows, Liam watched as the consequences of their choices began to spiral out of control. Neither of them knew how close they were to a much darker truth, one that would bring their world crashing down around them. After the devastating loss that ended Westlake's championship hopes, Jax's world fell apart. The moment he threw the game-losing interception, something inside him shifted, and it wasn't just the crushing weight of a missed opportunity. He knew he wasn't the same player anymore. The pressure of living up to everyone's expectations had become unbearable, and the painkillers, once a temporary solution, had now consumed him. The addiction had crept up unnoticed, but now it was impossible to ignore. Each pill he took numbed not just the physical pain, but the emotional toll of the life he had built around football. What had once been a dream was now a nightmare he couldn't escape. The team's locker room after the game was a storm of frustration, anger, and disappointment. Coach Fields, a man who had always been a pillar of strength for the team, was visibly shaken. He had placed all his faith in Jax, and now it seemed that faith had been shattered. The media vultures were already circling, their cameras and microphones eager to tear apart the performance, and soon the rumors about Jax's deteriorating condition spread faster than the game highlights. His once glorious future in football was now in jeopardy. But it wasn't just Jax who was feeling the heat. Liam, too, was caught in a tangled web of lies and deceit. The betting ring had not just been about money, it was about control. The further Liam sank into the world of illegal gambling, the less he could distinguish between right and wrong. The guilt over what he had done, passing off inside information and influencing the outcome of games, gnawed at him relentlessly. But there was no turning back. The ring's hold on him had tightened, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Mr. Gray had made it clear, if Liam didn't continue providing information, the consequences would be far worse than anything he could imagine. What Liam didn't know was that the repercussions of the game loss were beginning to bleed into his own life. The gambling ring, which had once seemed like a shadowy, distant influence, was now coming closer, and the pressure on Liam was intensifying. Mr. Gray wasn't the type to take failure lightly, and he knew how to exert power over those who owed him. The financial pressure was mounting, but it wasn't just about money anymore, it was about survival. Mr. Gray's demands had become more urgent, and Liam had no choice but to comply, despite the heavy toll it was taking on him. As the weeks following the game passed, the cracks in the facade of Westlake's football program began to show. Jax's performance in practice deteriorated, and it became evident that he wasn't just struggling with the pressure of being the star quarterback, he was battling something much darker. Rumors about his addiction to painkillers began to surface, and while the coaching staff tried to protect him, it was clear that Jax was on the brink of losing everything. His once promising future in the NFL seemed more like a distant memory with each passing day. His relationship with Coach Fields, once built on mutual respect, now felt strained and distant. Liam, too, felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had always considered Jax his closest friend, and yet his actions were now contributing to the destruction of everything Jax had worked for. The guilt was suffocating, and as the season continued, Liam's desperation grew. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about saving himself from the consequences of his own actions. The more Liam gave in to Mr. Gray's demands, the more he found himself tangled in a web of deceit. He had become a part of something much bigger, and now there seemed to be no way out. The tipping point came one evening when Liam was approached by Mr. Gray with an ultimatum. The ring had received a large bet placed on Westlake's next game, a game that Jax was supposed to lead the team in. It was the final regular season game, and a win would send Westlake to the playoffs. Mr. Gray made it clear. Liam had to ensure that Westlake lost the game, and in return, the ring would forgive his mounting debts and guarantee his future in the program. It was the ultimate test of loyalty, and Liam was faced with a choice that would define his future. For Liam, the choice seemed impossible. He had already gone too far, and the pressure to protect his secret was overwhelming. But it wasn't just about the gambling ring or the money, it was about the friendship he once had with Jax. He had watched as Jax struggled, battling his own demons, and now he was being asked to push his friend even further into the abyss. The guilt gnawed at him, but in the end, he knew what was at stake. If he didn't comply, there would be consequences far worse than just a lost game. The night before the game, Liam found himself standing at a crossroads. He could either walk away from the ring, risk it all, and come clean to Jax, or he could continue down the path of deception. The decision weighed heavily on him, but in the end, fear won out. He chose to betray his friend, the one person who had always stood by him. The next day, as the game began, the pressure on Liam was more intense than ever. His role in ensuring the outcome had been clear. He had to help the ring secure a win for the opposing team. The game itself was a blur of tension and anxiety. Jax, still struggling with his addiction, fought to stay focused, but the weight of the world seemed to press down on him with every play. He was determined to prove himself, to show everyone he could still be the player they believed he was. But as the game wore on, something felt off. Plays weren't working as they should, and small mistakes began to stack up. It was clear that something had shifted, but no one could pinpoint exactly what had happened. As the game came to its devastating conclusion, a loss that would end Westlake's playoff hopes, Jax was crushed. He had failed again, and this time it felt different. The media backlash was swift and unforgiving, and rumors about his possible drug use, his injuries, and his future in football were everywhere. But what no one knew was that the true story behind the loss was far darker than anyone could have imagined. As Jax sank deeper into his addiction, Liam's own fate was sealed. Both of them were on the verge of losing everything, but neither of them realized just how far they had both fallen until it was too late. The truth was about to come crashing down, and it was a truth that would expose everything. The fallout from the loss was immediate and unforgiving. Westlake's once promising football program was now mired in scandal. What was supposed to be a season of triumph and glory had turned into a nightmare for Jax. The press relentlessly tore into his every mistake, and with the public focus squarely on him, his personal struggles became an open secret. The whispers about his addiction to painkillers were no longer just rumors, they had become a full-blown crisis. Jax was no longer just the star quarterback, he was a cautionary tale. The university was scrambling to manage the damage, and Coach Fields, who had once been a mentor to Jax, now found himself in the impossible position of defending his star player while knowing the truth of Jax's deteriorating state. But it wasn't just Jax who was falling apart. Liam, too, was facing the consequences of his actions. The guilt he had been carrying had grown unbearable, and though he had convinced himself that he was only protecting his own future, deep down, he knew that his betrayal had cost him something much more precious. His friendship with Jax, once the foundation of everything, was now shattered. The distance between them had grown so wide that neither of them knew how to bridge the gap. Liam's involvement with Mr. Gray and the gambling ring had spiraled out of control, and now, the consequences of his actions were catching up with him. It wasn't long before the truth began to surface. The gambling ring, which had once seemed like an anonymous, faraway world, was suddenly very real and very dangerous. One evening, as Liam sat alone in his apartment, he received a call that would change everything. It was from Mr. Gray, but it wasn't a routine check-in. There was an ominous tone to his voice, one that sent a chill down Liam's spine. The ring, which had been responsible for so much of Liam's downward spiral, had caught wind of something bigger, something about Jax's recent performance and his involvement with painkillers. The ring's influence was far-reaching, and their stake in the outcome of Westlake's games had never been more significant. Liam had long been a pawn in their game, but now he was at the center of something much darker. Mr. Gray was clear. If Liam didn't continue to feed information, the consequences would be catastrophic. But this time, there was more at stake. The ring had begun to suspect that someone within their circle had betrayed them, and they were coming after the people who could lead them to the leak. Liam, whose involvement had already caused irreparable damage, was now a target. His loyalty to Jax and the potential to destroy everything they had worked for had put him in a position where there was no escape. Meanwhile, Jax's world was crumbling. The addiction that had once been manageable was now uncontrollable. His physical and mental state had deteriorated to the point where he could barely get through a day without the help of painkillers. The cracks in his game were becoming impossible to ignore, and the once promising prospect of an NFL career had all but vanished. Jax had become a cautionary tale for what could happen when a player was broken by the weight of expectations. His relationship with Coach Fields, who had been his mentor and father figure, was now irreparably strained. Fields had tried to help him, but Jax's refusal to seek real help made the situation worse. Jax's isolation grew as he turned inward, seeking solace in the very thing that was destroying him. The spotlight that had once felt like an affirmation of his success was now a constant reminder of his failure. Each day felt like a countdown to something inevitable, an end to his career, a collapse of everything he had worked for. He couldn't escape the pressure, and each pill he took made it a little easier to forget the weight of the world on his shoulders. But the reality of his situation was closing in. His addiction was no longer something he could hide. The truth was starting to come out, and the consequences were becoming unavoidable. The tipping point came when Westlake's athletic director, a man who had long been trying to protect the program's reputation, called a meeting with Coach Fields and the university's legal team. The investigation into Jax's behavior had intensified, and now the university had to make a decision. Either they could help Jax get the rehabilitation he needed and hope for a public redemption, or they could cut ties with him entirely to protect the program. The pressure to act was immense. Fields, who had always supported Jax, now found himself torn between his loyalty to the player and his duty to the university. The decision was made for him when the administration publicly announced that Jax would be suspended for the remainder of the season. The news hit like a bombshell. Fans, alumni, and the media erupted in anger, disappointment, and disbelief. The quarterback, who had once been the face of Westlake football, was now banned from the team. The suspension was framed as a chance for Jax to seek treatment, but it was clear to everyone that the university was doing damage control, trying to salvage what little was left of their reputation. In the days that followed, Jax withdrew from the world. The suspension was the final blow to his already fragile sense of self. But what no one knew, what even Liam didn't realize, was that the pressure wasn't just internal. It was a pressure that came from the outside, a pressure that was still being driven by Mr. Gray and the shadowy gambling ring that had entangled them both. As Jax was left to face the fallout of his mistakes, Liam's world was about to come crashing down in a much more dangerous way. Liam, who had hoped to escape the gambling ring's grip, found himself at the mercy of Mr. Gray. He had become a liability, someone who could no longer be trusted. The ring had already begun to unravel, and with the investigation into Westlake's losses, Liam's involvement was becoming more apparent. What had started as a small betrayal, a quiet way to ensure a game's outcome, was now a part of a much larger, far-reaching criminal operation. And as Liam's world crumbled around him, he knew one thing for sure: there was no way out. The walls were closing in on both of them, Jax and Liam. In the end, neither of them would be able to escape the consequences of the choices they had made. Their once promising futures in football had been stolen, not just by their actions, but by the dark forces they had allowed into their lives. The truth was about to come crashing down, and when it did, it would bring with it a reckoning neither could avoid. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark and tragic story of the power and the pressure in college football. This tale of betrayal, corruption, and ambition reminds us that even the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another case from Mystery Minds. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.